Welcome to the App Advisory Show, your fortnightly dose of all things cloud accounting, apps, and app advisory.
Hello all, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the App Advisory Show. I'm delighted to have Richard Suswain on from Tyrrell Accountants, who I've known for quite a long time now. Richard, how you doing?
I'm not doing so bad, Matt. How about you? Are you well?
Yes, I'm good. I'm pretty good, mate. Pretty good. Looking forward to some sort of freedom in the not too distant future. You in the same boat?
Oh, very much so. This last lockdown has been quite a slog, to be honest. It's been hard work. I think it's probably because of the time of year. You know, January, February are pretty bleak at the best of times, aren't they? And when you've got lockdown to contend with as well, it's hard.
Agreed. I mean, I've been walking quite every morning, trying to do it every day, and it's just been nice this week. Is like being 7:15. The light's starting to get there, whereas 2 months ago that's 8 o'clock, nothing earlier. So yeah, getting those longer days in is going to be good, and clock's changing for us in the UK in a few weeks' time, so that'll be excellent. Right, so we're going to have a chat around cloud accounting, the sort of digital evolution for accountants, and we talk about the term app advisory. I know you're keen on your tech, but tell us a little bit about you, your role, who you work for, like a bit about your past, so people who are listening will be able to resonate with which part of your journey.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, as I say, my name's Richard Suswain. I've been with Tyrrell Accountants now for 1995. I joined, so 25 years.
Wow.
Prior to that, I was at Deloitte for a couple of years, just in the personal tax department there. I got put in the same team with a guy called Craig Tyrrell. He went off and worked on his own. I joined him a couple of years later, just as working as a back bedroom operation, which was quite interesting until the council kicked us out. And then so for the last 25 years, which have been building up the firm. So I've done everything from accounts, payroll, VAT. So I've seen all aspects of practice, but these days I'm spending more and more time on the operational aspects of the business, helping clients with Xero and the implementation of apps, and doing a lot of that sort of work really now. So yeah, quite interesting.
So if we're going back sort of 25 years and you've done sounds like all sorts of the processing and outputs and inputs within an accounting firm, that tech and that digital change, if you think back to 1995 or late 90s to what you're dealing with now, that must be a pretty big shift if you were to sort of bounce back sort of 20 plus years.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, if you're going back to 95, I don't even think we had internet then.
Yeah. Okay.
So we probably had a couple of standalone computers with some software installed.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't remember there being any internet in 95. So yeah, a lot of it was a lot of manual process, a lot of handwritten work still at that point.
Yeah.
But then again, the demands of HMRC weren't quite the same in those days.
No, very true.
So it sort of correlates in some sort of way. So yeah, it was a very different workplace.
So you mentioned that you sort of started moving into sort of the tech element for the firm in terms of make sure we're adopting this cloud technology correctly and any associated apps and systems that we can interact with. But what's been your cloud journey? Like, when did you start interacting with cloud and seeing it as a way for your firm to progress and align with?
Well, I think we've always been advocates of the phrase working smarter, not harder. So we've always looked at ways that software or technology can help. So even when we're going back a number of years now, we had a stab at outsourcing back in 2010. We tried to develop our own OCR technology in 2000, around the same period, I think, as well. So we were always trying to look at ways to improve things and make the best of what technology has to offer. But in terms of getting into cloud, I guess that would have been, that started becoming a thing around 2012, 2013 for us.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes you can look at these things and think, yeah, that sounds great, but would a client do it? And it wasn't until Xero perhaps came along that you thought, oh, actually, you can see how this benefits the client, not just the accountancy firm.
Okay.
So we dabbled around with some bits and pieces. Like I say, before Xero, we were using BankLink and AutoRec just to try and streamline certain processes within the office. And Xero was the one that we got stuck into.
Okay, so 2012, 13 for you and your firm. So that's a fair, almost veteran sort of world, really, when we're looking at that in terms of, and we talked about the evolution essentially of accounting and the change from when you started to where you are now. What about that sort of evolution, even in the cloud space, in terms of when you first interacted and engaged with Xero to where you're at now? What have you seen there? What's been some of the points for you that you found interesting with that progress?
I think a lot of it's the growth of the app marketplace. I mean, the Xero as a core product is still, it's still got the same functionality. I mean, it's always been improved, I get that, but it's still got fundamentally the same, the producer the same. But I think a lot of the innovation since then is probably in the app marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we first started using it, I don't know, it might have been a couple of hundred apps at that point.
Yeah.
And I guess now, I don't know, you probably know better, I don't know, 800, 900, something like that maybe.
Yeah, I would think probably in the thousands official. I'd say in the thousands point probably officially in the next 6-12 months they'll announce, and then all the ones that interact with the open APIs that these cloud accounting vendors have got now, it's in the thousands really, probably in that.
Yeah, so that seems to be where a lot of them. But what do you find? Again, do you find that a lot of the apps that get introduced pretty much perform similar functions? So even though you had 300 back in 2013, let's say, okay, you perhaps had credit control, you had payments or whatever, you just find that is there much true innovation and true new productivity and new functionality coming out, or just more of the same? I think that's an interesting.
I think you're right. It's gone. I think it was quite broad and shallow in going 2012, 13. There'd be a few categories and maybe a couple of 3 different options. There's now a lot more varieties, but there's a lot more depth to those. So rather than be 2 or 3, there's probably 5, 6, 7, 10 in some instances, certainly around the finance function space. I mean, invoice automation and credit control, that you can see a lot more coming there. I think the difficulty for those apps coming into that space is the market leaders have normally built up an element of trust and a position of power, and they're well known by the accounting profession and bookkeeping profession now. So you've got to have really deep pockets as an app to come in and play in that space, because most of the money is actually on awareness and marketing, as opposed to the actual development of the system. Talking about, I don't give loads of apps any sort of airtime, but I think it is interesting to talk about the innovation on this, because we've had payment providers like Stripe and PayPal and WorldPay and Go Cardless, and all those have been a stable part of that payments. But I don't know whether you've seen this, but I saw iWalker Pay last week.
Yes, so that's the new Xero integration, isn't it?
Yeah, so pretty cool, because I mean, what you're doing there, if you're in the it's a buy now, pay later, a bit like we get now if you go and buy a bike from Halfords.
My apologies.
Oops,
I couldn't hear what you said.
My Apple Watch is having a mind of its own. You couldn't understand what I said, maybe. But going back to that, so what it's doing now is it's buy now, pay later. So it's giving you the opportunity for up to a certain amount that you can now spread that cost of £1,000 or £10,000 over the 3 months, and it's quite low interest rates. There's a transaction rate for the seller as well. But if you start, I mean, in terms of being innovative, it's still a payment, but ultimately there's a slightly different product and it solves a different problem. So you've got to look for some of these like really small and minor elements which are changing in those. But if that buy now, pay later for business is pretty cool, because I think as a consumer in this world, we've seen Klarna and things in the retail world come along, and we've been used to that world. So it's interesting, we're starting to see some of that maybe mirror into the business world.
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, it's just taking what a core offering and then just expanding that out even further, isn't it?
Yeah,
but I think again,
I was going to say, I think with Stripe, they brought in direct debits, and Go Cardless did them. Go Cardless will bring in other elements. So they've just got to keep innovating, because they're trying to move outwit each other and outmove each other, which is good, because we get a much better set of products.
That's right, but I think coupled with that, I think it can be a little bit overwhelming, because again, when you go back to 2013, okay, you could perhaps say, okay, Chase is the one for credit control, or you'd say Spotlight or Futurely would be one for reporting. But now, of course, you've got all this as massive clouds, because there's a lot of crossover between apps now as well, where, you know, if you look at credit control, okay, do you go fluidly and have your cash flow and your credit control? You know, so it's just the waters are muddied somewhat, aren't they, now? With
definitely, so it's blurred lines, because also the core product as well, the zeros and the QBOs and all of those, they're all building out as well. So there's an element. I remember. I think maybe 2014. I think Chaser brought out Chaser won App of the Year or something. 2014, I think this was, or maybe 15. And one of the features that Zero announced was invoice reminders. So it was. I do remember that, and it was like, oh, this is a bit contentious at the moment, because are they starting to eat their own ecosystem now? You know, Zero and QBO, they don't do credit control to the level, not yet anyway, of those tools or systems that are available. But it just shows that you can impinge a little bit. But I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But you're dead right. I mean, I think the lines are blurred between apps and the categories they're in, but also the cloud accounting, the core offering, also can blur the apps as well now, blur into where some of the apps features. So we'll have to see what happens with that.
Yeah, most definitely. But it's certainly moved on anyway and answered the question.
I was going to say, we could sit and chat about blurred lines and apps and everything all day. But I mean, from your perspective, I know you've been mega, you know, a real advocate on cloud and this ecosystem and the power that can bring to SMEs, but also I think that the value that it allows an accountant to start to present to clients in a different way. What's been enjoyable about the cloud and this digital journey for you personally? What have you got from it, and what keeps you chugging along in this digital world?
Yeah, I mean, I do like seeing the innovation. I do like to see what's new and what's possible. Again, when you're comparing pre-cloud, I mean, a lot of the systems were independent of one another. So you're almost implementing best of breed software. And if you change one database, you've got to make sure the other databases, I mean, you know, nothing was ever the same. So one of the things that I like about the whole integration of the software is the way the software integrates, and the fact that if you change something in one system, it'll automatically change in another. So that makes things a lot more efficient from, certainly, you know, one of the things from a practice perspective. Again, with the way the software models work now, I think it's a lot more affordable. So again, you're looking at a subscription model where maybe you're paying, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 quid a month. Whereas again, in previous times, you'd perhaps be looking at several thousands to implement a piece of software. I mean, I can remember when we had, it was a CRM system that was by Sage called Act. We spent thousands on it. You know, you think how much it costs to implement a CRM now, you're comparing apples and oranges. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
So I think that's a massive thing. I think the flexibility is another big plus, where again, you don't need to install on a server. As long as you've got an internet connection, you can work with all these apps. You can, you know, like we're doing now, but you can work from home, you can connect from home.
Yeah.
You know, you can regularly check in. And I guess another thing is just the opportunities it presents. So whether you're looking at using cloud accounting and the apps to streamline compliance and turn around the churn really well, or whether you're using that as a bed, if you like, to move into some sort of advice or better services for clients, it just gives you more opportunities to take the practice in different directions.
Great. Yeah, so I think you're dead right. There's that compliance with cloud, you know, where it's a more efficient review. That it's not all about new services. It's just about doing what you've always done in a better way, using these tools and using the tools to do some of the heavy lifting. But then you also have the option, if you so wish, you want to take your firm that way, to devise some more services and some other ways of interacting with your clients, which involves the digital world. So you're dead right. You are in that position where you can choose how you wish to use this cloud accounting softwares that we have.
Yeah, and I say it's relatively cheap to get involved in it as well. You're not committing huge sums of money without knowing what the outcome might be. Okay, you might experiment and you might lose a few £100 or whatever, and it doesn't quite work out, but it's not like implementing a massive piece of software.
No.
So, you can try things out, you can play around with things, and it just gives you, more choice, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Okay, so what's some of your favourite apps? So the question we ask every guest who comes on. What's some of your favourite apps? It can be personal, it can be business, it can be the ecosystem. It's completely up to you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the apps, I still like a couple of the ones that we implemented quite early on. So I think one of the first thing we did was Practice Ignition.
Yeah. Okay.
Automating the engagement letters and the proposal, and now since they integrated a payment facility in it a few years ago, that has really helped. Whereas automated invoices, automated payments, okay, that's great. Another one that I like back from the early days was something called Customer Sure,
okay,
which is customer satisfaction surveys.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, we will, when an invoice gets issued, a few weeks later, we'll perhaps send them a satisfaction survey. So that's a nice little one that we've been using now, I don't know, 6-7 years. So that's good. Some of the newer ones, I mean, Xavier, but that's probably it gets talked about a lot. So that's good. But I've also done some good work recently with Teleroo as well, a bulk payment facility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So since they launched their Zero integration, I think it might have been back end of last year, maybe last summer, maybe.
Yeah.
Now that works really nicely in terms of pushing out a batch payment and dispersing all the monies to all your suppliers in one go. So that's some of the good work ones that I enjoy and have enjoyed working with in the past.
So it's interesting there. You've got like your Practice Ignition, which is your quoting, but engagement and payments as well now. So that I'm sure allows for a prospect engagement and then an onboarding when they're a client. So that's a nice way. Customer Sure, that's the first time that's been mentioned on this podcast. So that sounds like NPS type of stuff. You're just tracking Net Promoter Score and just getting some feedback on what works and what doesn't. And is that in personally as well? We're looking at NPS in all sorts of ways at the moment. Have you found that's driven some of your behaviours because it's been based on, or some of your changes within the firm because that's based on some real feedback from clients, whether that be positive or constructive feedback? Has that helped a lot with sort of channeling where you're going to focus on?
It has. I mean, we were very nervous when we first implemented it because nobody wants to hear negative feedback because we're all a little bit sensitive in that way, aren't we? Yeah. So it was a little bit of a risk when we did it because no one wants to hear bad news or the fact you think you're doing a good job, but your client thinks you're not. But the beauty of it was that if a client wasn't happy with a particular element of the service, you've got a chance to put it right before they leave because you know about it. So that was one of the things. I mean, it has helped channels. I mean, if we get regular feedback about a certain aspect of our service, then of course you've got an opportunity to do something about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't think. Maybe some of the common things back in the day was billing, for instance.
Yeah.
So of course we needed to explain that perhaps put in some fixed monthly fees, which is when Practice Ignition comes in as well. So it's just understanding clients' needs and trying to accommodate them.
Yeah, I think that feedback loop's vitally important, isn't it? Because I think what happens with that as well is to go and have a conversation with someone about a difficult, and it's not always negative, it can be positive as well, but it's still difficult to give, to actually sit there and take either criticism, but actually it's quite difficult sometimes to take some positivity because it feels a bit embarrassing. So having that barrier of a medium to take it through, and then like you say, if it's positive, it's an area that you maybe shout about in terms of to new clients or prospective clients. And then if it's an area where there's some an area for improvement, then at least you can, it's an evidential fact that we need to look at this because we're getting this regular feedback that this area of our process isn't tight enough, or we're not whatever we're not doing. So I think it is important. So it's really interesting you brought up that, like Customer Sure. So
I think it's also I think it's also important when you look at people's buying patterns now. If you're looking to buy something or looking to go to a hotel, you look at the reviews on Amazon or you go to TripAdvisor or anything like that.
Yeah.
Why would you not want to see the independent reviews of an accountancy firm if you're making that decision? So again, it's just something that we've tried to push on with in that way, and it's done well for us.
Great. I love that. That's great. Some very different systems there. So great to go through that. And then you mentioned a couple of apps like Teleroo and stuff, which I know you've had good success with, and really showing the value of that tool and your expertise around it. So that's been good. What's been more challenging about this cloud world? So it's great to hear what's been progressive, but from you, somebody who's literally just getting out there and looking at cloud accounting vendors now, so you back in 2012, what do you think is something, what's been more challenging of that?
I think some of the frustrations is that not everybody wants to move at the same pace as you do.
Yeah.
So we can all get fired up and we can all get excited about a certain app, or we look at something and say, oh, wouldn't this be great? But sometimes our clients don't share the same passion. Mm-hmm. And that can be frustrating sometimes, or maybe even it's the staff who don't share the same passion. So that, it works both ways sometimes. So we can all get fired up and we're disappointed when nobody else does. And I think part of it is you've got to accept that cloud accounting isn't for all clients. Mm-hmm. Some clients are quite happy just the way that they're doing, and they'll probably only change if they're forced to, for things like MTD, for instance, or they've had their fingers burnt, so need to put some of the infrastructure in to prevent it happening again, or they've got some massive pain points that need solving. Otherwise, you find a lot of clients are just quite happy ticking along. Yeah. So I think again, you've got to understand, although what we think's great, it might not necessarily be replicated. It might not be what the client thinks. So I think that's something that you've got to get your head around as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that actually, and I think probably for me and you both, when dealing with SMEs in 2014, 15, I think if you're coming into this world now, you've got a much more educated SME in terms of digital, like even the basic use of Zoom, and we've got kids putting schoolwork in via Teams and Google Classrooms, and so we've got great grandparents on Christmas Day Zoom meetings because that's what we had to do this year. So I think we're very lucky that at this point now we're going to have a much more digitally educated community, which in turn will start to move into the businesses themselves to be thinking, well, what do we do? And I think if you go back to 2013, 14, 15, it was still so fresh back then. So like you say, we go to these events, this is going to be brilliant for the SME, but the SME is, like you say, still on a spreadsheet, maybe got a couple of PCs, maybe still whiteboard based. And it's such a gap just to go from, I'll go full digital from this sort of analog way of working, when the business actually might be exactly how they want it to be in terms of output, whether that's financially or business and work balance, home and work balance. So I think you are right. It's not always going to be for everyone, but I think we should offer it.
Definitely. A lot of people are resistant to change as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I think it'd be quite interesting. I mean, it's not something. When you look at your number of clients on cloud, maybe it'd be quite interesting to look at the age demographic as well.
Yeah.
So you are looking, okay, everybody of a certain majority of our cloud is of a certain age bracket, and that'd be quite an interesting thing to look at as well. Because, like I say, technology isn't for everybody, but try and focus on the ones that would be interested.
But I suppose as well, if you were, to trigger those conversations, talking about that, if there's people of an age group where it's about exiting, then it's surely, they always say get your systems right if you're going to exit, because it's a key part of whoever's going to purchase. But it does fall into that, doesn't it? Because I think anyone who's going to be purchasing the next 5-10 years is going to be looking for hopefully digital systems, certainly not manual systems, and maybe certainly not, wedded to a server longer term. So
you'd hope so.
Yeah,
you'd hope. I mean, we see it in our own profession, don't we? That the firms with the digital firms and ones with recurring revenue, they're almost valued higher than the more traditional firms. So I mean, again, I can't comment on other sectors, but if ours is anything to judge by, then you'd be much more desirable.
Yeah, it sounds like a fundamental of business, doesn't it? That you want it to be there. Okay. And if you were starting over with the cloud again, so you know what you know, but you can you go back to 2012. Anything you do differently for those again who are just about to jump on board of this world? What would you think about?
I think don't try and run too quickly.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the previous comment, it would be don't expect everybody's going to jump on board, because they probably won't. So I think the first thing you've got to do is make sure your team's on, your culture within your own firm, everyone's on board and everyone's fully engaged with it, because that was one of the problems we had back in the day, was that, okay, in 2000, we had a lot of accountants who seemed quite happy just sat in front of an Excel spreadsheet. So when you start saying, okay, we're going to start implementing technology to allow you to have better conversations with clients, it frightened the living daylights out of them.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure, before you embark on this journey, you've got to make sure your team are on board, and you also got to understand your client base, and are they all going to be on the same boat? Do you need to just focus on certain areas of clients? You need to focus on certain sectors of clients. I guess the other thing that I'd probably do is, again, with the don't run too quickly, would be don't try and implement too many apps at the same time.
Yeah.
So what we did, we implement, along with Xero, we tried to implement Receipt Bank, Chaser, and Spotlight reporting at the same time, just to give them a whole suite of apps to cover, saving time, boosting cash, getting better control of your business, that sort of stuff. But I think it was almost too much for clients to handle. I think a lot of them were just quite happy with Xero plus Receipt Bank. Yeah. And then the other two, they, four new pieces of software at the same time, I think was probably too much to try and do at the same time. So yeah, just perhaps take it a bit slower.
I think back then as well, you probably would have had to choose Spotlight, because I doubt Xero would have had brilliant reporting back then, would it? It had a period where reporting was pretty weak, actually, in cloud accounting systems in general. So we did have the, like we mentioned off air, the crunch boards and the Spotlight. There was those sort of knocking around.
That was about it. That was the choice. I think it was literally a crunch boards and Spotlight. And now you look how many reporting apps there are. It's just like, well, fill your boots. It's just massive.
So basically, you'd say just get the basics right first and foremost. Get a good defined process of getting your Xero or whatever tools you've got, plus your Receipt Bank equivalent, or whatever you're using, or Dex as it is now. Dex Prepare. So you'd concentrate on that, and then look at building out once you've got a good understanding of what that brings to your clients as well.
Yeah, I would. And I think with a lot of our clients, even though they've been on now for, 3, 4, 5 years, some of them are only at a point now where they're ready to move on.
Yes.
And also, we need to have confidence in the accuracy of the data before we're prepared to move them on as well.
Yeah.
So that's where something like Xavier sits across the top of Receipt Bank and Xero. So you can have a certain degree of confidence that when you're talking to clients, that on a regular basis, that data is accurate, rather than looking at it, sending out a report and not totally sure. So
cool.
Yeah,
great. Okay, so some good advice there for anyone who's listening and just got started or just thinking about getting started, because I know there's quite a few. And what's the aim for you and the firm for the next 12 months in this sort of digital tech world?
I still think we've got more work to do on refining compliance process, and I think again going back to the Xavier, I think that's helped with that, because now in theory, a lot of the bookkeeping can be outsourced. You stick Xavier across the top of it as an element of quality control. So you can, and now with the outsourcing, a lot of people are offering daily, weekly, monthly. So you can really kill the bookkeeping.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're still trying to master. We're not 100% there yet. Coupled with that, it's now a case of we've got a lot of clients now who are on Xero, maybe because of MTD, or maybe because they've been on it for other reasons, but probably not fully utilizing the capabilities of A, the software that they've currently got, or B, what the app marketplace has to offer. So I think a lot of clients just don't know what's possible.
They don't know what they don't know. And I think as a profession, we've not really had to go back and sort of refresh software, have we? Because it didn't really move that quickly. You know, in the desktop world, you might have had a couple of updates a year or 18 months, and it was nothing major. Where I think this isn't just across account profession. Any SaaS system nowadays is really aggressive with their features and fixes and even slight tweaks and integration. So when you've put clients on 4 or 5 years ago, anyone who's listening, their business has moved on and the products they use has moved on. So you've got to almost keep refreshing to see, like you say, is there any other problems that could be solved either by better use of the software, or is it additional apps, which is where this world comes in, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's just being able to have a conversation with those clients, I think, a lot of the time, because, you know, a lot of people are just happy ticking along.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they don't know they've got a problem until it's happened.
Yes.
And then they need your help. Whereas it'd be much better. Okay, it's a whole change in mindset. It's trying to do problem prevention rather than problem solving. And that's a challenge. That is a challenge.
Agreed. Just on that part about the improving the bookkeeping compliance workflow and adoption, and you haven't got to answer for your firm because this is quite. But one of the things I see, it'd be interesting what your take is on this, is that we've got very wedded to a compliance process. So let's take a VAT return, for example, here in the UK. We've become wedded to the output being the VAT return being complete. Yet at that point, there's a whole amount of rich data on these cloud systems. So at that point that we've done the VAT return, that data is at a complete point. And there's insights in there, isn't there? Like you say, the problem prevention, there's a whole host of data in there that we could review. And I think one of the challenges is getting people to think, or finding the people, or changing the mindset, or training the people into the VAT return's important because that's the tick in the box to say we're compliant, there's no fines come in, and we're happy with that, the output. But also at that point, there's some insights sat in there. And now we have tools like Xavier or Dex Precision, as it's called now, and Xero and all the other cloud accounting vendors out there. So how do we turn that where we can find 2 or 3 nuggets of useful information, which either could prevent a problem or spot an opportunity for the client? I think that's the key, isn't it now?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's quite easy to, in some ways, it's quite easy to review someone's Xero account without actually investing in additional software.
Yes.
So, you know, some of the things that I've been doing of lately is, okay, if a VAT return is prepared in the example you've given, okay, you can send out the VAT return, but then, okay, why don't you have a look at debtor days? Why don't you compare the debtor days to the invoice terms on the invoice template? So if the debtor days are if debtor days are 45 and payment terms are 14, then you've got a conversation.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, again, if you can demonstrate, if they reduce their debtor days, I don't know, by 7, it would mean an extra 15 grand in your bank account. Then you've got, and the client has got a good chance. You've got a good chance the client might actually do something with you.
Yes.
In terms of doing something about it. So it's just trying to provide them with some real life examples or how it affect them rather than the theory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, and it's the relevancy, isn't it? So I've done this review, and your VAT return's fine, and please, we've run it, check it through, submit it, etc. But just let you know, here's 3 nuggets of information as well. A bit, and this would mean if we solve this problem, it would mean X amount in your bank, like you've just said. Now, are you interested in a conversation? And actually, you talk about something tangible. And I think that's the key at the moment. It's like how we train people to think and look at those things. And maybe some of them are standard, but for some clients, they won't be standard. They'll be on a client by client basis that we have to have some context of the client as well before we make those sort of appraisals.
100%. I mean, and again, it could be things like not using receipt bank properly, or not using auto. Just little tips, because to build up the trust and relationship. Because once you've got that, then the chances are that a client will come to you more regularly with their issues, and then you've got the opportunity there to do whatever work is necessary.
I would agree with that, Richard. There's definitely a positioning. If you keep talking about this stuff to them, they realise you're the person to come to. If you don't speak to them about it, they just don't. They assume it's not you because you've never mentioned it to them before, or never given any guidance, or, as you say, tips. I wouldn't go as far as full advice, but just some tips on here, some better use. And then you want them to keep opening the door, because as long as you've got a service to offer, when there is a problem that you can solve with this world, then it's going to be a quite straightforward conversation to take them into that service.
Yeah, I mean, we've had one quite recently where a client implemented quite a large project management app and spent several thousand. Didn't know we could help. They just didn't know we could help. So again, it's just being in a position where the clients know what you could do, and you being that first port of call to advise them accordingly.
Yeah, because it's not about implementing the project management, is it necessarily? But having the engagement for sure that this is happening, because if there's data going to be coming through into the accounting, the reason I mention this, there'll be some accountants going, "Oh, I don't want to get into it, like implementing project management tools and all that." But the point is that if they're changing their operational system and the data is going to be affecting the accounting, then you want to be involved in understanding how that data is going to be coming through, and you might have to perform some integration testing with the system. So it's not just about the implementation, it's about the integration and what happens with the data, which will fall in your remit further down the line anyway, when you go, like, what is all this data that's coming, because it doesn't align to what we had last quarter or whenever we last saw the data, whatever that might be. So I think that's something, isn't it, as well, that they would need to know that we can help us with aligning the data and the systems as well as implementing them.
And I think we need to, because otherwise all you end up doing is fixing a problem later down the line. So if that conversation is had early doors, it just makes things a lot easier all around.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's cool. Right, we'll call that a wrap. I think my timer went off about a couple of minutes ago. That was that loud, sounded like a fire alarm. That's what it was. So keeping an eye on our times. So Richard, thanks a lot for your time, your insights. I know you've been an advocate of this world and heavily engaged in the ecosystem and all of those types of events that we've been to. So thanks a lot for spending some time with us, sharing your knowledge, and I look forward to catching up with you soon, Richard.
Yeah, pleasure, and thank you for inviting me on. Thank you.
Not a problem. Right, guys, if you enjoyed that, we've got quite a few of these. Every 2 weeks there's new episodes coming out. You can get them on all the podcast platforms, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Google. These also go onto YouTube, so you can see our lovely faces as you run through this. But yeah, please go and subscribe, YouTube or on the podcast platform. And if you fancy giving us a review, that would be much appreciated. But from me and Richard, thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.